12 minutes after 8. Today, Toronto City Council will consider a proposal from the Mayor to add 400 spaces to the city's shelters as soon as possible. These spaces will be found in existing shelters and in motels around the city. This is coming after advocates for the homeless called on the Mayor to open the armories in this city, to declare an emergency, and to find 400 more beds for the homeless. The Mayor's move, as we heard yesterday, is already being criticized by those anti-poverty advocates.
Shoehorning 400 spaces into already overcrowded drop-in centers and the shelters is not a good idea. The guests and the clients who use these services are just experiencing health hazards here due to overcrowding. There's not enough washrooms, there's no showers often. These conditions are exasperating their mental, their physical, and their emotional challenges that they are facing.
That's some of what we heard yesterday from Rafi Aaron of the Interfaith Coalition to Fight Homelessness. John Tory is the Mayor of Toronto.
Good morning.
Why do you want to have 400 spaces added to the city's shelter system?
Well, because we need them. I mean, the capacity, I acknowledge, is running above the 90% threshold set by the City Council. It's running up in the mid-90s. It's not even cold yet. It's going to get colder this week, and I want to make sure that we're ready to deal with a situation that has been compounded by the presence of some refugees who we welcome to the city, but some of them are struggling and need housing. But and it's compounded as well, Matt, by the fact that we have people from all over the region at Toronto's responsibility and expense who are needing shelter and come to the downtown, so we need the space. And I believe that to do it in the way that has been advised by our experts in the city and confirmed by people I've consulted outside, that this is the best way in the circumstances where we're trying to do something on an urgent basis to produce those spaces across the city.
You were asked for 400 beds, and you're providing 400 spaces. There is a difference between the two. Why not create the beds and just have the spaces instead?
Well, in this case, one of the things that I would point out is that this plan, and the plans going forward actually do have substantial numbers of, permanent shelter spaces and beds coming on next year. We have 291 beds coming on next year on the plans, and I've asked that 2 shelters, or maybe 3, I forget, for 2019 be accelerated into 2018 to get, permanent shelter facilities available. But the bottom line is that no one could know yet what is going to be the number of beds versus shelters that will be created. I'm hopeful most of them will be beds, and we're in the midst now of doing an audit of all the 62 shelters across the city to create this extra capacity to make sure we can look after people.
We just heard from Rafi Aaron. He says that the shelters now are at or above capacity, that there are limits in terms of the number of people that city staff have said can be in there. You're looking at putting 400 more people in, and it's not just going to be in those shelters. You're looking at motels as well. But he says that you're shoehorning people in.
Well, that's what he says.
There's not the space that's there.
Let's look at who he is. I mean, he's an advocate, and I understand that. And so I would say that what I'm taking is his word against the word of the experts who work for the city. And under no circumstances would they, or have they suggested that we relax our standards in order to accommodate these people in the existing shelters. And I'm taking their advice, and I then went a further step and talked to some of the other acknowledged advocates in the community. Why is it when it comes to opening the armories and when it comes to how we solve these problems, are these 1 or 2 people, are these 1 or 2 people to be taken as having the gospel as to how to do this?
Well, some of them, people like Kathy Crow have been involved in this for decades.
Okay, that's fine.
So Kathy Crow says, open the armories, that this is an issue.
And so I talked to the people about opening the armories, and they say to me that the armories are less suitable, and this is, again, objective, professional public service experts and people from outside in the homelessness community. And I just wonder why it is that the view of OCAP and Kathy Crow and some of these people are to be taken somehow as gospel, that if I don't do exactly what they say with respect to how this should be done, because I've had advice from our professional public service experts saying that the armories are well down the list of their preferred options, that somehow this means that I'm not doing my job. I'm very concerned about this. I care deeply about making sure we have the arrangements put in place. And here's the bottom line:
you're very angry about this. You're angry about this.
No,
too.
I'm not. I'm very passionate about it because I want to help, and I stepped forward with a plan to help. It's a plan that's going to work, and it's a plan that also has the stamp of approval of our experts that we employ and of people from the outside that I brought in to consult on this. And that's why I just get angry that yes, I do. I get angry at the fact that there's sort of an orthodoxy that a small group of people, suggest that it's their way or no way. And I just don't accept that. I have a job to do here to make decisions in the end, and I based it on expert advice, and we're moving forward to get it done.
Can you just clarify why the armories are not suitable to open
They've
up?
raised a number of issues with me in terms of the physical configuration of it, and the fact that if you're trying to share a military purpose that's an ongoing, it's not a building that's sitting empty. It's a building that's in use by the Canadian Defence Forces, and you have to put in what I call security arrangements between the two groups of people that are using it. Some of the facilities for people to use are inadequate, and there's also, I've mentioned this before, it's not the major consideration. There's a cost consideration. It's actually, contrary to what Mr. Raffi says, it's actually more expensive to use that, but that's not a major consideration. If it scored highest on points on every other aspect of this in the eyes of the experts, I would say fine, then we'll do it. But we're doing what they think is the best in the circumstances to provide this shelter as soon as possible at as reasonable a cost as possible, and in circumstances they have said to me over and over again, Matt, that this will be done within the shelter standards. So there will be no compromise. They talk about, squeezing people in and this sort of thing. Sure, there are going to have to be accommodations made to create these beds, but at the end of the day, it will be done in a way that is consistent with shelter standards.
This is something that we're talking about on the 5th of December. It's 8 degrees today. It's not even cold. We're not even in the midst of winter yet. In the depths of winter last year, we had a conversation with a woman who works in the shelter system on city staff, and she was reluctant to talk because she thought she could lose her job in speaking out, but did, and said that politicians don't understand what actually happens in the shelters. Do you think that, with respect, you have a sense as to what goes on in those shelters?
Well, I've been out. Look, I can't say that I'm out every single night, and I can't say therefore I would understand as much as, say, a person who works there all the time, but I've been out last winter to the winter respite centers, to the actual shelters. I have been, and so I understand it's a very difficult circumstance. It's a very challenging set of circumstances, and by the way, I wish we would spend some time talking about the fact that the funding arrangements from the province are unfair to the city where a lot of these people seek refuge from around the region. I wish we would talk about the fact, as I've asked, that the federal and provincial governments give us some more help to help with the resettlement of the refugees. I wish we would talk about the fact that the lack of supportive housing and the complete abdication of responsibility of the health system for mental health causes a lot of people to be living in these shelters.
But having said all that, to go back to what she said, she feels that people who are making decisions are disconnected from what she sees on the ground in the shelters.
Well, I would say, look, maybe our answers are less than perfect, and that's fine. But what I will say is the very fact I stood up and announced the plan to have the 400 beds and to have the acceleration of the projects. And one more thing I'll mention that we're going to do that's got little attention in this: we're going to sit down with housing providers, private sector, nonprofit, and say, can you produce right now for us some units? I'd like to produce a couple of hundred, as many as possible, where we could move people out of shelters who are basically living in the shelters to permanent housing, who are ready to go, but they just can't find a place to go. So I'm going to do that too, and show leadership as the mayor sitting at the head of that table, asking those people to do that, and I think that will contribute as well.
Just a couple of seconds
It's
left.
a problem.
What happens in February or March when it's really cold? Are you worried about that?
Well, we're adding the capacity so that we can be in a situation where we can absorb whatever may come because of the cold weather. That's why we're adding. We presently have 5,000 shelter beds, so if we're adding 400 right now, plus the ones that are coming on stream, there are new shelter beds coming on stream in February, March of this coming year. So by the time we do all this, we'll have added 10% capacity, and the idea behind that is to take us back to the threshold level and be able to accommodate people who are coming because of the cold weather.
Mayor Tory, good to have you here on this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
John Tory is the mayor of Toronto. This issue of increasing the number of shelter spaces in advance of the winter truly arriving here will be discussed at Toronto City Council today. You can find more on the council meeting at cbc.ca/Toronto. Your thoughts on this would be welcome as well. 416-205-5807. There is already a discussion underway on Twitter at